Hello everybody and welcome to NABCA's webinar, the three-tier system of alcohol control. Why do we have it and what are the benefits? This webinar will explain the three-tier system, highlight the benefits of the system, and explain how it works to foster public health and safety. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, I encourage you to please contact Citrix customer service directly. Their phone number is 855-352-9002. That's 855-352-9002. And give them this webinar number, which is 148-846-107. Again, the webinar number is 148-846-107. So we expect this webinar to last 1 hour with room for Q&A at the end. If there are a lot of questions and if attendees don't mind, we may stay on a little longer. And please know that once the webinar begins, I'm not able to acknowledge receipt of questions, but know that Pam will answer questions at the end. And if you have questions, I invite you to look at the chat window on the lower right corner of your screen. At the end of the presentation, I will ask the questions on your behalf. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available later through the NABCA website. I'd now like to introduce you to Pam Erickson. Pam is a passionate leader on alcohol issues. Currently, she owns Public Action Management, an Arizona small business, and operates an education campaign for a healthy alcohol marketplace. From 1996 to 2003, she directed the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. In 2003, she joined Oregon Partnership to direct leadership and media campaigns to reduce underage drinking. Her recent publications include Alcohol Deregulation by Ballot Measure in Washington State and Issue Briefs for States 2014. Her other publications include The Danger of Alcohol Deregulation, The United Kingdom Experience, and Safe and Sound, How the Three-Tier System of U.S. Alcohol Regulation Helps Ensure Safe Products and Protects Against Revenue Loss. These reports explain how deregulation can lead to increased social problems such as high rates of underage drinking, public order offenses, and alcohol-related disease. Recently, Pam served as an expert witness in a key alcohol regulation case in Kentucky and California. Her educational materials are available at healthyalcoholmarket, all one word, .com. Pam, thank you very much for being our presenter today, and I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It's a pleasure to talk with all of you this afternoon. This is a very important topic, but I have to say that as a regulator, I came to realize I didn't know as much as I should about that topic. When I left the Liquor Commission after 7 years and joined Oregon Partnership, I had to acquaint myself with all of the research that says what's effective in controlling alcohol problems. And I came to realize that the three-tiered system and its structure of regulation was really very important, and then I actually didn't understand it as well as I should. So eventually I came to develop this program to explain it to people in relatively simple terms. It is a very complex topic, as I'm sure you will come to see. So the purpose of this webinar is to explain the benefits of the three-tier system and how it works to foster public health and safety. The objectives are, I'm going to describe the system and why it was developed. I'm going to explain how it works to enhance basic system strategies designed to reduce problems and indicate the unique benefits of this system for the industry and the public. So the first question is, what is the three-tier system? As an analogy, I like to think about it as the foundation. When you have a house, when you buy a house, you have the foundation inspected, you realize how important the foundation is, but over the years you kind of forget about it. And that's kind of what we have with the three-tiered system. Our three-tiered system is the foundation for our alcohol regulations, but we tend to focus on some of the other regulations and forget about what's happening with the three-tiered system. Technically, the three-tiered system is a regulatory structure that involves a closed system of product sale. So all alcohol products start with a manufacturer or supplier that's licensed. They can only sell to a licensed distributor. That distributor, in turn, can only sell to a licensed retailer. Each tier is usually required to be independent of one another. So it's a very comprehensive system that protects the products flowing through it, as you will see in a little bit. Next, why was it developed? Well, after Prohibition, we addressed the task of developing regulations. And there were two dramatically different experiences that we drew upon. One was the situation before Prohibition, which was basically a very poorly regulated market, if it were regulated at all. Then, during Prohibition, it was a completely illegal market. Fortunately, we had a study to help guide the development of our regulations called Toward Liquor Control, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, let's go back in history, and let's look at what happened before Prohibition. This slide has a quote from a University of Washington historian who specializes in alcohol history. His name is Bill Rorabaugh, and he characterized the situation as for generations, Americans have been heavy drinkers. And by 1900, saloons were identified with political corruption, gambling, crime, poverty, and family destruction. It was propelled by something called the tied house system. It was a system where a series of national manufacturers would own retail establishments. And these manufacturers required that these retail establishments only sell their products. So brand X manufacturer would own brand X retailer, and the only beer or products you could buy there were from brand X. And so you had a multitude of saloons in local communities because each manufacturer had their own retail establishment. Because these were large national companies, they weren't really a part of the local community. They used very, very aggressive sales tactics. They were only interested in the bottom line, in selling as much alcohol as possible, and they used a lot of incentives, gambling, prostitution. A lot of times they were located in areas where there were a lot of workers, factory workers, who would be encouraged to go to the saloon after work, and they could pledge their monthly paycheck for their bar bill, and sometimes after the end of the month there was nothing left for the family of their paycheck. It engendered a lot of social problems and fostered the solution, which was really quite an extreme solution, of Prohibition. The second experience that we had was with an illegal market. Prohibition has been characterized as a failure, but it did not fail in some ways. Consumption was reduced, and the public order problems that you had outside the saloons were really eliminated. But it drove drinking underground and spawned a nationally organized crime syndicate that were employed to supply alcohol. There were also a lot of loopholes that where you could legitimately buy alcohol if you had a medical problem or you had a religious purpose for it. while it did reduce consumption and some problems, it became very unpopular and eventually was repealed. When it was repealed, the statute, the constitutional measure which repealed it gave the duty to regulate alcohol primarily to the states. And so the states had the duty to regulate alcohol, but few people really knew how to do that. And fortunately, there was a book called Toward Liquor Control that was a write-up of a study that was done by two men, Bostic and Scott, that surveyed many countries and looked at different models of regulation and proposed two different systems, a control system and a license system. But primarily they were interested in ensuring that the problems that occurred both during and before Prohibition would not reoccur. The first thing that was of great concern was what's called vertical integration. That's where you have the manufacturer, the distributor, and the retailer all in one company, because that resulted in the marketplace domination, the aggressive sales tactics, and things that created the social problems. So a three-tier system was eventually adopted one way or another in most of our states. And it's designed to prevent vertical integration, to have things in three separate tiers and to have those tiers independent of one another. Within all of these tiers are various regulations that really reduce the severe impacts of the profit motive. Price wars, incentives to consume in high volume created a lot of problems. And so we have a lot of regulations that are designed to reduce those things. Also, we had measures that were designed to reduce the public order problems that occurred in saloons. So most states have quotas on the number of outlets to control outlet density. And actually, after Prohibition, there were a lot of efforts to encourage people to do their drinking at home, not in saloons and taverns. Also, there were regulations that are designed to eliminate the criminal element. We generally, I think, assume that our system today is pretty free of criminal elements, but we still see some problems every once in a while. There also was an effort to encourage people who drank to drink lighter products. Many states have regulations that allow the widespread availability of light beer, but have tighter control over products of higher alcohol content. Those were certainly the products that it was the drink of choice during Prohibition, created a lot of problems during that era. We can look at some examples to help us understand the problems that occur in the marketplace when a product is commercialized. If we look at the efforts to legalize marijuana, particularly for recreational purposes, we can see some of the problems. I have a slide with a picture of some of the products that are for sale in Colorado, and we have read various news articles about problems. The difficulty is that private businesses' objective is to make as much money as possible. And this isn't a bad thing, because if you're not focused on making money, you're probably not going to be in business very long. So you have to be focused on your bottom line. But an extreme bottom line orientation can induce sales that result in underage use, addiction, impaired driving, violence, abuse, and psychotic events. So regulation seeks to tamp down some of these business practices that for other commodities are perfectly legitimate. Marketing to youth, if you have a different kind of business, if you're selling flowers, it's perfectly acceptable to market to youth, but not for alcohol because we don't allow underage persons to drink. Price concessions, which encourage high-volume consumption. This is a very common tactic in our free market today to offer incentives to buy more product. That, again, needs to be tamped down because it can encourage high-volume consumption. Certainly, if we had lollipops that were alcohol, involved alcohol, that would be a problem. These are typical youth-oriented kind of products that we think are inappropriate. Another example that is good to look at is the United Kingdom. Right after Prohibition, the United Kingdom had a very good license system, and many of our states modeled their regulations from the United Kingdom's experience. But beginning in the late 1950s, they embarked on a almost 4 to 6 decade process of deregulation to the point where they almost treat alcohol like any other commodity. Large grocery chains are vertically integrated. There's very little in the way of a distributor tier. They work directly with the manufacturer and dominate the local markets. Cheap alcohol is available in the UK 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Industry lobbyists and lawyers are so powerful that it's been very difficult to embark on a correction course. The last 3 prime ministers have had extensive alcohol policies, many of which didn't get implemented and haven't been exceptionally effective. Industry lobbyists and lawyers prefer to focus on education and personal responsibility. If you look at this slide, you'll see the middle photo shows an example of the failure of personal responsibility. The United Kingdom usually has all kinds of these kinds of situations on weekends, and particularly in New Year's. This photo is this New Year's Eve photograph. The United Kingdom has been really overwhelmed with drunken behavior. Their enforcement budgets and their ER budgets are really overwhelmed with the amount of situations where they have to respond because people are not exercising personal responsibility. The government in the United Kingdom estimates that they lose about 1/3 of their revenue through system leakages, which means that the retailer bought the product from somebody other than a major manufacturer. There have been instances of counterfeit product, tainted product, and so that's become a real problem. The United Kingdom today has an epidemic of high rates of underage drinking, public drunkenness, alcohol-related disease. During the recession, there was a reduction in consumption, so problems seem to be subsiding, but they are still very large and very much a problem. The next slide, it gives you a rundown of the 3-tiered system and what it involves. I warn you, it is a really complicated system, and it's complicated by the fact that we have laws affecting alcohol regulation at every level of government. The federal government focuses primarily on manufacturing. The primary regulation is usually done at the state level, but some states have delegated licensing functions to the local level. So we have kind of a mishmash of regulations throughout the country. So it is really very complicated. And what I'm going to give you is a little bit of a broad brush so that you understand the basics. but if you want to know what regulations happen in your individual state, you need to talk to your lawyer or talk to your alcohol regulatory control agency to get the particulars from your individual state. But let me just go over some of the basics. The first principle is financial independence for each tier, and it's achieved by several practices which are prohibited. The first one is ownership. In many states, ownership is prohibited from one tier to another. In other words, a retailer can't own a distributor. A manufacturer can't own a distributor. Now, the federal government does allow ownership, but it requires that retailers particularly are independent. Ownership is one way to prohibit financial ties, but there are lots of other ways that businesses can be tied together short of ownership. So there are a whole series of other things that are usually prohibited: loans, favorable credit terms, cash payments, exclusive favorable product pricing. These are kind of typical regulations that are designed to prohibit specific ties between a manufacturer, distributor, and retailer. Many states have franchise laws that protect the distributor's independence from being dominated by a manufacturer. And then we come to laws that often are considered to be silly. These are laws that are called things of value. Oftentimes a manufacturer or the distributor will want to give a retailer certain things to help promote their product: napkins, coupons, calendars, ashtrays, all kinds of things. And many states allow a certain amount of that if it's of kind of nominal value, but when it gets to things like TV sets, labor, free products, fixtures, furniture, then it really kind of goes over the line and becomes a thing of value that's prohibited. The next slide shows the issue of functional independence. And this is often one that is not even found in the rule books because it's embedded in the license privilege. Each sector is licensed to perform their particular functions. A retailer is licensed to have a store or a restaurant bar and sell products at retail. They are not licensed to have a central warehouse and distribute products around. They're not usually licensed to manufacture the product. So each tier is designed to have a specific function and to be licensed to do that particular function and not perform some other function. Now, there are some exceptions to these, but that's the general principle. The next slide shows some of the important regulatory functions that each tier has. And I think that's one of the brilliant aspects of our system, is that some of the tiers have duties, regulatory duties, and help make the system work better and help save the government some money. The middle tier, the distributor, collects the excise tax on alcohol. And we have almost 100% collection of excise taxes. Other countries lose a third to a half, a substantial portion of the collections just never happen. And so that's one of the great benefits of our system. Also, the government doesn't have to set up a special unit to go out and collect the excise tax using government employees. One of the benefits that is not really always recognized of our system is that we have a great system of product quality. Because it's a closed system and because a licensed manufacturer can only sell to a licensed distributor and to a licensed retailer. The middle tier tracks all of the bottles and cans. And in that way, if there's a problem with any product, it can be quickly identified. We had a situation recently where apparently some of the tops of a glass bottle were chipped, and there was a concern that there might be some glass that fell into the bottle. Those products were identified very quickly, removed from the shelf, and no customer was ever harmed. In contrast, if you look at things like not too long ago, we had a problem with tainted spinach. People got sick from eating spinach, and it took a long time to find out where that came from, and meanwhile, people just stopped buying spinach. So people completely innocent suffered greatly. We just don't have that problem. Other countries, every month, you see articles about people dying or getting very sick from tainted product that was sold by some fly-by-night outfit that used methanol, a substance that's not fit for human consumption, can make people very sick and can kill people. So we have a very, very safe system, and it protects us. The retail tier, we depend on our retailers to stop sales to underage persons and intoxicated individuals. They're kind of our first line of defense for underage drinking and intoxication. And so they have a very, very important regulatory function which they perform. So those are some of the great things about our system. You probably don't know a lot about the efforts to keep the criminal element out of the business. I think as we're finding with legalization of marijuana, it's actually pretty difficult to keep the criminal element out of the business. And it took a long time for us to completely rid the alcohol system from elements of criminality, and we still work at it. In fact, the federal government monitors some of the ingredients that go into the production of bootleg products. So if you live off in the mountains and you're ordering a large quantity of sugar, you might come to the attention of the federal government, because what would you be doing with all that sugar other than making some bootleg product? So we still make quite a few efforts to keep the criminal element out of alcohol business. I also talked a little bit about the fact that we have alcohol regulations at every level of government. The federal government focuses primarily on the manufacturing regulation. If you are any kind of an importer or supplier, you need to have a federal license, and any product that you produce has to have a federally approved label. The federal government also has a number of trade practice regulations. These are things that ensure a fair, transparent, and even playing field so that small operators in your community can be successful alongside large national chains. That's one of the benefits of our system. Each state has some level of trade practice regulations, and some of them are very similar to the federal regulations. In most states, the primary source of regulatory authority is lodged at the state, and often in a state department of alcohol beverage control. But some states have delegated a lot of that function to local governments. In Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nevada, for example, all the licensing is done at the local level. So it can get kind of complicated. There are also states that have what's called dual licenses. Illinois, for example, if you want to be a retailer, for example, you have to get both a state and a local license. And the local government can have different regulations, like different hours of operation and that kind of thing. Most states have some kind of local regulation so that local governments can have some control over their business and nightlife community. There are actually some benefits from regulation. Oftentimes regulation is characterized as being bad for business. I don't think alcohol regulation is at all bad for business. In fact, I see a lot of benefits. And the first one is that our regulatory system and its three-tiered system particularly has allowed the flourishing of a craft beer and now a craft distillery business. If you were to go to Italy, for example, like I did 2 years ago, you would go into a restaurant and I typically saw 2 brands of beer. And the reason is that large beer companies have exclusive arrangements with retailers. In Mexico, for example, there are 2 large beer companies, and up until recently, almost all retailers had an exclusive arrangement with one or the other of those large companies. Those craft beers simply could not get to market because no retailer would carry anything that wasn't owned and supplied by one of these 2 large companies. Recently, the Mexico Competition Commission have ruled against exclusive arrangements. You can still have some, but they've curtailed them. So it may be that craft products will eventually get to the market. The federal government does not allow exclusive arrangements with a particular kind of product. That's simply illegal. And so the flourishing of the craft beer business and now a flourishing of a craft distillery business is really due to the system that prohibits these kind of practices, which would keep these products from being on the market. Regulations also reduce some business costs. If you're in the breakfast cereal business and you want your product prominently displayed in a big box grocery store, you're going to have to pay for that. It's called a slotting fee. So in order to get an eye-level placement, you will need to pay the retailer for that. Slotting fees are illegal for alcohol. So alcohol businesses do not have to pay slotting fees. Favors in exchange for exclusivity or favorable placement are also illegal. So those things are not costs of doing business in the alcohol world. Trade practice regulations prevent price wars and reduce market volatility. One of the things that businesses really appreciate is a certain amount of stability and predictability for their business. And alcohol regulations provide a degree of that. And then finally, the three-tier system provides the product tracking that prevents disasters when a tainted product is discovered. Now let's talk about some hot issues. First of all, I want to talk about I think the hottest issue is the big box grocers are very interested in being able to sell all forms of alcohol in kind of lightly controlled environments where they can use self-service to reduce labor costs and so forth. A number of states, in fact most states, have some version of a system that allows the widespread availability of light alcohol products. And originally that was 3.2% beer. Beer is now typically more like 4 to 6%, but that was the idea, encourage people drink lighter products by making them more widely available, and then control the sales of products with higher alcohol content by having them available in packaged liquor stores. In control states, those stores are owned. Originally, they were owned. Now they're often licensed, but the state has some ownership of that product. In licensed states, those are done in individually licensed package stores. There's a big push to change all these regulations. Alcohol is a high-margin product. It's often used to induce customers to come to your store, and so everybody wants to sell alcohol. And so there's a big push by big box grocers to squeeze out the small operators and distributors and push to change regulations through lawsuits, lobbying, and even funding a ballot measure like the measure which privatized alcohol and deregulated wine in Washington State. It was sponsored and funded almost entirely by the Costco Corporation. Another hot issue is large suppliers that want to own distributors and craft producers. Oftentimes there's talk about eliminating the middleman. Well, the middleman has a function. It's delivering alcohol products, and large suppliers are seeking to increase their bottom line, and if they own distributors, they can get the profits from that function as well. They are also seeing the popularity of craft beer and craft products, and a number of large suppliers have purchased small, flourishing craft operators. So that's creating a lot of controversies, and by a large supplier owning a distributor, that's taking kind of the first step in vertical integration. On the other end, small craft operations want to have some exemptions from some of the three-tier regulations. Brew pubs, for example, want to be able to brew their product on premise and then sell it. Well, that is a vertically integrated operation. And most policymakers feel that as long as these exceptions are only given to small operators and don't become widespread, then it might be okay. But then what happens when these licensees become very successful and very big? They're going to want to continue some of these same privileges. In recent years, we have seen some pay-to-play practices. This is where somebody will pay a retailer extra money or give them extra favors in order to favor their product. And so we've got problems with that. Three-tier violations are often very hard to identify and to enforce, so we have some enforcement difficulties. One of my greatest fears is that we will lose some of these good regulations because people just don't understand them. And I have to say that I committed that sin when I was a regulator. There was a proposal to eliminate one of our quotas, and when asked whether it served any real purpose in today's market, I said, well, I just didn't see that it did. I was wrong. I didn't understand it completely, and we lost that one. So I think changes need to be made very, very carefully. And you ought to be a little concerned when a regulation is characterized as antiquated. Up until very recently, there's been very little antitrust enforcement, although there are now some changes. So in summary, let me just summarize some of these major points. The three-tiered system is a tightly controlled controlled system which protects the public from tainted and counterfeit product, ensures high tax collections, and helps reduce the involvement of the criminal element in the business. Trade practice regulations curtail market practices which encourage high volume consumption, sales to vulnerable populations, and attract dishonest business people. Our comprehensive regulations also foster a more even playing field, which allows the small local licensees to operate alongside national chains. And the final point is that licensees have very important regulatory duties that help protect the public, such as preventing sales to minors and intoxicated persons. Before we get to questions, I want to offer my website as a resource for you. It's healthyalcoholmarket.com. My website has, I produce a monthly newsletter, and all you have to do is sign up for it. It's free of charge, and I'll send it out to you. I have a number of educational reports. Maggie mentioned many of those earlier. These are free of charge. You can download them from the website. I did a report on the Washington State ballot measure that I published recently in 2014 that can talk about that. The issue brief for 2014 is now available, but within really just a few weeks, I will do a revised version for 2015. These are designed for policymakers who really have time to read one page. And they can be separated. You can Xerox them, give them to your legislators, put together your customized packet. These are really designed to be helpful so people will come to understand our regulations. Now I'd be ready for questions.
Okay. Pam, we've got several questions. The first one is, how does the Amazon model fit with the three-tier system, as they would be both wholesaler and retailer?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know there have been some, kind of third parties out there. I know that we wrestled with this issue a lot when you had online wine sales. And I think what you have to do, and I could be wrong, I think you have to work with each individual state, because each state is going to be different in terms of licenses. Some won't, some states still don't even allow importing through the mail. So that's a very difficult and technical question, and so I think that probably some legal expert is better at answering that one than I am.
Okay. I have another one, and then just for folks who would be interested in asking a question, again, just please type in your question in the lower right-hand corner in your chat window. And we'll get to your question. And so a next question, Pam, is what drove the deregulation in the United Kingdom 50 to 60 years ago? What was the shift gradual?
Yes, the shift was very gradual. Like I said, it took place over 50 to 60 years. And when you make a small change, you may not see the difference for a few years, and really I think the epidemic didn't really explode until I think around the late 1900s, early 2000s. But it really got a push when Maggie Thatcher was the Prime Minister. She was a strong believer in the free market system, which a lot of us love the free market, but the free market is problematic for products like alcohol, products like marijuana, there are a lot of products that are potentially dangerous, and you just can't use the same techniques. I often use an analogy of a flower shop. If you were going to go into the flower business, the first thing you would want to do is want to know who buys most flowers and how can I make those people buy more flowers, and how can I expand that pool of people. Well, if you do that with alcohol, it means you want people who drink a lot to drink even more, and you want more people to drink very heavily. So you just have to be a little more cautious about some of those sales tactics, like I say, are perfectly legitimate for other commodities.
And Pam, sorry, are you?
I was just going to say a couple more things about the UK. Once the thing got really out of control, they made decisions based on really bad information. Like they thought that if they eliminated closing hours, that would space out the people coming out of bars. There wouldn't be as many fights. There wouldn't be as much drinking. And really the opposite happened. Law enforcement wasn't staffed up for it, so they had to have people out at 4 in the morning versus 1 or 2, whatever closing hours were. And people were just drinking a lot more because the bars were open longer, and they were drinking around the clock. It was a disaster. But the research community told them that it wouldn't work, and people didn't pay attention. So.
And Pam, a follow-up question to the UK is, what tier was attacked initially?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I think it's a follow-up question to the one regarding the United Kingdom. What drove the deregulation? Was the shift gradual? And then the follow-up question to that is, what tier was attacked initially? Do you know? Like, what tier did they eliminate initially?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has happened in the UK and is happening here is greater alcohol outlets, and there have been lawsuits. There have been all kinds of other things that have happened that suggest it's just unfair to give the privilege of selling alcohol to one group and not to another. And unfortunately, those laws were often not well defended. And we didn't, years ago, we didn't have good research on outlet density. We now have a lot of research that tells us that if the more outlets we have for alcohol, that tends to push problems. And it also burdens law enforcement. If you double the number of outlets, that means twice as many licensees that you have to check up on, and it just radically increases the problems. We just know a lot more about what works and doesn't work with alcohol today than even 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago when things started loosening up. We just didn't have the same kind of research, but we really know a lot now, and we can craft a pretty good control system.
Okay. A next question is, are there any studies that indicate that it is in the economic interest of alcohol retailers to promote responsible drinking as opposed to binge high consumption drinking?
I don't know of anything, and I'd have to look around and see particularly how that would be phrased. Certainly it's laudable when you have retailers that are very responsible. One thing I found in working with licensees is that most licensees want to be responsible, and they don't want to compete with someone who isn't. I remember having a rule advisory committee meeting where one tavern owner said, I just don't like it when I see people throwing up over the deck at my competitor's establishment, and I don't want to have to compete with that person. So, that's one of those things that maybe is something in the future that can be done is some rewards for people that really try to do the right thing.
Okay. A couple more questions, Pam. Regarding Costco, they appear to be involved in the manufacturing process and on the retail end with private label Kirkland products. What is being done to monitor this, because they are beginning to vertically integrate themselves? Because aren't they vertically integrating themselves?
Yes, I've been very worried about that issue, and in fact, I'm going to issue a report on private labels. In looking at the whole private label issue, the first thing I did was study how private labels are done with other commodities. And typically what happens is a retailer works with a manufacturer to create a new product. And most big box grocery stores have several lines of private label products. They will have a low value product, a product that directly competes with national brands, an organic product line, and some of them now have premium product lines. I have had some discussion with the federal government about, isn't this practice illegal? And the answer really is it's a technical matter. If you have a business agreement between a retailer and a manufacturer that basically ties them together in an exclusive arrangement where the retailer is obligated to buy a product on a continuous basis, that may be a violation of federal law. Now, I'm not an attorney, so if somebody wants a legal opinion, they're going to have to talk to somebody else. But I am hoping that the feds will clarify this issue a little bit, because we are seeing a lot more private labels out there. And if they're done exactly in the way that they're done with other commodities, I think it's, I don't quite see how it's a legal operation. But, I could be wrong. I expect to publish this little booklet that helps to clarify what are private labels, how are private labels used in the marketplace today, because they used to be kind of, low value, poor quality products. That's not true anymore. Grocery stores are even going after the premium line, the high value products. So it's, I think it's a great concern, and I think there is a potential for, through the guise of private labels, having actual vertical integration. So it's one of those issues that I think we all need to be concerned about, and need to make sure that these products are actually in conformance with our laws.
Okay. Another question here. What do you think is the key in getting responsible beverage server laws ordinances passed?
That's a good question. I come from Oregon, where we have, we had a really very strong server education and server permit program. But when we tried to expand that to the sellers at the off-premise establishments, it just didn't get anywhere. I would hope that, like I say, I believe that most licensees are responsible, want to be responsible, and if this and many of them do the training on their own. What I would try to do if my state didn't have a responsible beverage law or education program, I would try to get support from the industry, because I would think it really is in the industry's interest. Nobody wants a server that overserves somebody, that person goes out and kills somebody on the highways. No one wants that on their shoulders. So I think that getting the industry support, convincing them that it really is in their interest to do that, I think is the way to go.
Okay. A couple more questions. I know we're getting close to that 3 o'clock hour. One other question here is, do you think high ABV malt beverages need greater regulation such as 12% ABV Four Loko?
Certainly that product is, I would say, needs greater regulation. You know, one of the things that happened after Prohibition was, you know, I talked about the idea of making low alcohol content products more widely available. And at the time, it was 3.2% beer in single-serving cans. And the idea was that, you know, you sell low-alcohol products in a single-serving can or bottle so people can monitor their alcohol consumption. But when you have a product that's 12% alcohol in a 24-ounce can, those cans that are 5 drinks, almost 5 drinks in one serving, you know, people don't know what they're drinking. You know, I found that many people actually do try to monitor their drinking, but you know, they often aren't helped. They don't have the tools to do that. And I think we want to foster personal responsibility. We certainly want to do that. It shouldn't be our only strategy, but we want to encourage people to be responsible, but they have to have the tools to do it. You know, I think that a couple of states have made products like Four Loko and some of the large cans with high alcohol content only available in liquor stores. But I do think some of those products need greater regulation.
Okay. And Pam, I know we're at 3 o'clock, but there are just 2 more questions, and they actually both relate to Costco. One you may have answered already, but I'll just read it anyway. One is, can you discuss the Costco case and the other impending legal challenges to the 3-tier system, and if possible, the legal principles at stake, for example, commerce clauses versus states' right to regulate alcohol?
Well, that's the perennial dilemma is the, you know, the 21st Amendment versus the Commerce Clause. And, you know, those are things that judges wrestle with. And I don't remember the legal article, but I think it was Jim Mosier that wrote a kind of a history of the 21st Amendment. Right after Prohibition, the judges were very liberal about letting states do pretty much whatever they wanted to in terms of regulating alcohol. Now there's kind of you know, a more favorable attitude towards the Interstate Commerce Clause. But you know, I think that you just have to balance those things. And it struck me that as a regulator, one of your primary jobs is balance, making sure that your local market is well balanced. We want our businesses to be able to operate successfully, but we don't want them to be contributing to social problems. And that, you know, that takes an ongoing, active role on the part of the regulator. Businesses are very clever. They're very good at finding ways around regulations. And so you will always have some new challenge. but it's important to remember your overall role. What Costco did, the state of Washington unfortunately has a somewhat weak ballot measure regulation. Other states curtail things like signature gathering. In Washington, people could be paid by the signature. Oftentimes, they would have a clipboard with 5 different ballot measures, and they would just get somebody to sign all of them. People often didn't even look at what they were signing. And once it gets the appropriate number of signatures, there isn't any kind of legal review or way to challenge the ballot measure. Other states do that, and oftentimes when one of these things passes, you spend years cleaning up the legislation because it's poorly written. Costco's ballot measure that passed was a rewrite of 60 pages of Washington statute. I read that several times, and I did not pick up all of the benefits that went to the Costco Corporation specifically. And I doubt more than 20 voters read the entire ballot measure and actually understood it. It's very, very complicated. If the ballot initiative was originally designed for grassroots operations and has just been kind of captured by corporations sometimes, Costco donated $22 million for passage of the measure. It just, I think it's a kind of anti-democratic way of doing things, but it is what it is. So now the state of Washington is going to have to deal with it for many years to come.
Okay. And a final question, Pam, is federal involvement the only way that Costco can be stopped from going after the other control states?
I don't know that the feds would wander into that one. The difficulty is that states have the primary role for regulating alcohol. And I'm afraid that people have to do it state by state. I don't know that the federal government or particularly the federal agency would do much of anything. What I hope is that people come to understand we have a very good alcohol regulatory system. And because of it, we're not as likely to encounter some of the problems that they've had in the UK and other countries. I just hope that people will come to recognize that and support the system that we've got. Our drinking rates and our problems are much less than what you've got in the UK and other European countries. It's often a myth that other countries do really well with alcohol. They don't. Europe is the largest drinking sector in the world. Their consumption rates, their rates of disease and problems are far higher than ours. Underage drinking rates are higher than ours. And they're starting to enact some fairly dramatic regulations. I just read about France that's beginning to have a problem with binge drinking with their kids, and they have pretty restrictive alcohol advertising regulations and are looking at doing some even more restrictive things. So I'm hoping that we can get industry support, community support, for the basic tenets of our alcohol regulatory system, because it really has prevented a lot of problems and keeps us safe.
Okay. All right, Pam, thank you very much. There have been several questions on whether or not the PowerPoint slides would be available, and yes, they are. You can email Pam, or you can email me, maggie.barshini@nabca.org. If you go to nabca.org, you can find my name in the staff directory. So thank you, Pam, for your time and for sharing your valuable knowledge with us, and thank you all for joining NABCA on this webinar. If anyone has questions that we did not address or thinks of something afterward, feel free to email me. Also, please visit the NABCA website at nabca.org for various resources we have, including white papers on the three-tier system and other subjects. We would like your feedback about this session and will soon be sending you a quick survey to complete. Also, let me know of any suggestions that you may have for future NABCA webinars. It is our goal to give you the education and the tools that you need to perform your function effectively. Thank you all again for participating in the webinar. We wish you all a great day. Thank you and goodbye.